Hi, everyone. I know you're going to love this conversation again with Richard Rudd. We had such a rich, fascinating conversation last time. Richard, as many of you know, is the author and founder of the Gene Keys, which is really a modern day mystery school. He's a philosopher, a poet, a mystic, a wonderful, wonderful human being, and a very unique voice in the world at this time to help to guide us. So I'm thrilled to be back in conversation with you, Richard. And it's always interesting. I mean, last time we both admitted that Richard isn't particularly well versed in astrology. I am a complete novice with L plates, with the gene keys, but somehow our two systems seem to link to produce perhaps something that's bigger than the separate parts. That's what we're hoping in this conversation. So we've had a very quick chat, very little rehearsal on this at all. So it's going to be very spontaneous, hopefully. So really looking forward to this, Richard. Thank you so much for being with me today again here.
Oh, thank you, Pam. I'm just overjoyed. I'm loving our riffing, and I agree with you. We both are sort of entering into territory that the other we're learning from each other, I think, and I think that's what is so rich here. And so I'm here to learn more again, and
Me too.
yeah, and hopefully share some insights with yeah with anyone who's listening.
Yeah, me too. And in the last conversation, Richard, you talked about Pluto moving through gate 41 on January the 30th.
Yeah, that's right. And so in that's in human design system, which the Gene Keys kind of grew out of, and so Gene Key or Gates 41 is this beginner, this start codon. It relates in our DNA. It relates to the start codon, which is at the beginning of a string of genetic instructions. So if you look at that at a cosmic level, then you're looking at something like that is beginning anew for the first time. And it's really interesting when you look at the sort of orbital mechanics of Uranus and Pluto and Neptune, which I think we're going to explore today, and see how these various strands of mythologies are kind of moving through us, but also through gene keys, we're looking at like how does that impact our physicality and our body and our DNA and the algorithms that make us up. And that's what's really fascinating. And so last time we spoke, Pluto hadn't yet moved there, but now it's there and it's begun a new cycle. And so's the sun, obviously, because the sun moves into gene key 41 every late January. And that's sort of that kind of coincides more or less with the Chinese New Year, but it's a bit later than our kind of Gregorian New Year, which is I've got another story, but so according to gene keys, that New Year is around the 22nd of January usually. So I'd always say to people, don't do your resolutions until then.
Yeah, it's interesting because the Sun was conjunct Pluto in my system on January the 20th, which was an interesting day, and it hadn't been conjunct Pluto in Aquarius since 1798.
Amazing. Yeah.
So, I'm going to be quoting some big, big cycle numbers here. So, that was the beginning of a genetic mutation, Richard. And I'd like you to talk a little bit more about that because that's fascinating.
Well, it's something that was predicted by Ra Uru Hu, the founder of human design, and he was a mentor to me while he was alive. And there's a lot of talk about that in that community, and also in the Gene Keys community, where it's viewed perhaps a little bit differently, as a time of the expansion of our consciousness as a whole planetary field, right? And so the notion that there's that our biology can mutate, we know this, right? It can mutate, it's mutated before. And so it mutates, and then there's a forking often of the paths of our biological evolution, and we know that through Neanderthal was one fork, and then Cro-Magnon was another fork, and they live together alongside each other, overlapping. And there's all kinds of discoveries and kind of possibilities that people are talking about, and how they coincide and how they communicated if they did. So we're looking at that again now, but we're looking at the mutation is sort of taking place perhaps for a different reason. I mean, they're always like about the evolution of consciousness. And this particular one, Ra spoke of it as something that takes place in our solar plexus. So it's something that involves our microbiome and our gut and the bacteria in us and that DNA. And that is what is mutating first. And the codons of our biology, that he predicted that we'd slowly start to see a new kind of human emerging. So babies or young children who would emerge with a different biology and different gifts emerging, in their nature. And while that's happening at a biological, physical level, it's also happening at the level of a kind of the field of humanity, of the frequency field, of the harmonic spectrum. So those of us who are kind of operating at higher frequencies, you could say, through the heart, will be very attuned to that new birth coming into the world of a new kind of human. And there's a lot of it is quite connected to the autism spectrum, and the right brain and the left brain, and how they kind of come together, and this notion of harmonics in our whole being, and how I don't know, we have these hidden in Gene Keys, we call them siddhis. We have these hidden superpowers latent in our DNA, dormant, and that they're beginning to pop open. And sometimes they pop open for a brief moment or a flash, and other times they start to kind of open for a while, and we have an experience of something from the beyond or something numinous, but generally they're beginning to pop open, a bit like the early snowdrops come out in the spring here in the UK, and they're the very first usually white flowers that pop up, and you never quite know where they're going to appear, but then they kind of appear randomly all over the place around the same time. This is a little bit like that. A new mutation, it kind of comes across the whole gene pool, but the early ones, it just sort of starts to pop what seems to be randomly. So and then it begins to grow throughout humanity over hundreds of years, and then it becomes mature, and then the new human sort of fully emerges. And I think I mentioned about the dragonfly story last
Yeah,
time.
it's beautiful. It's magical.
Yeah.
Really, I was just electrified by that when I heard about it. And I've quoted it and credited you many, many
Oh,
times,
thank
Richard.
you.
But it is very beautiful, and it's so interesting that, of course, this is part of the prophecy of the Hopi, the Mayans, the Queros. It's part of the 24th chromosome coming back online. It's partly the spiritual seekers and channelers are talking about us moving from carbon to crystalline, more and more people becoming more psychically sensitive, more stronger healing ability, more tuned into their dreams, etc. So all of this is happening, and it's so interesting because I was anticipating this simply through the lens of astrology. If I just looked through the lens of astrology and nothing else, not the prophecies, not people's experiences, I've been anticipating this for the last couple of years, and you can go back in my videos, and I've been kind of banging on about this because this wonky triangle that I talked about last time between Pluto and Homer and Sedna is very, very clear, not just about a transformation, but a complete metamorphosis, which we were talking about last time. But I've come to realize, doing more research since our last conversation, that actually we have something unprecedented happening astrologically. And I know we're going to get into Sedna as well, but we really have a combination of outer planets that are all coming into geometry with each other, which has never happened before to that degree in those places. So, and we might dig into the detail of that a little bit later in the conversation, but you look at that and think, however far we go back, I mean, some aspects happened 12,000 years ago, others, we just can't even track it beyond the 12,000. So we are in a time where the astrology is absolutely unprecedented, which therefore is talking about a whole new episode for humanity, and that is going to have several different expressions, of which biology is one, and I think certainly a new sense of the spiritual, and also a sense of connecting to the galactics as part of the symbolism I'm looking at as well.
Yeah,
Wow.
because of this explosion in the astrology world now of all these Oort cloud kind of objects and the Kuiper belt objects, and it's incredible. It's like a whole new field, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it's a whole new octave of consciousness.
Yeah,
And you can say, well, no wonder we've been able to discover further out planets because we've got better telescopes.
yeah,
Well, we only develop better telescopes because there's this parallel to the expansion of consciousness. We
exactly,
discover these deep space planets when our consciousness is ready to integrate them.
exactly.
So, but sticking with this genetic mutation, Richard, I know you've been very excited about the telepathy tapes as being, a big example of the genetic mutation we're going to be anticipating and living through.
Well, it just came my way that, since I last saw you, and a friend of mine said, "Have you heard this?" And so I listened to them over Christmas, and they really blew me away, and they were very well done. There's no kind of, I don't know, you tune into the people who are doing them, and Kai and those, they're amazing people. You can just tell they have incredible open mind and open hearts, and everyone's been blown open who's been around them. And I know there's also a lot of kind of skeptical stuff. I don't sort of haven't been involved in listening to that, but I know it's out there. Of course, it's out there. Um, and but yeah, it's an incredible thing. I see those autistic children who've been around for a long time now, and but now with this coming out this year and reaching the mainstream, and apparently at one point it knocked Joe Rogan off the #1 spot.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Wow.
for a short burst.
Wow.
So obviously millions of people were listening to them, particularly in the USA in January, early January, which is kind of really interesting if you consider everything that's going on astrologically. And so for that to hit the mainstream, and for us to hear about like these superpowers that are being kind of scientifically pretty much proven, to skeptics and people, because these children are listening, are hearing each other, and they're showing they have a networked consciousness, and but at different levels and degrees. So in a way that is they're the forerunners. They're not maybe the only forerunners, but they're definitely the forerunners of this new human that's coming in, and because they're showing these incredible abilities, and not just the abilities, but the heart space that they live in and that they emerge out of, which I'd love to discuss with you in a little bit. Like, how does that, how do these new gifts relate to the expansion of our heart and consciousness through the heart, which I see something profound in the astrology through Neptune specifically at the moment. So bringing us these gifts, and then bringing those, but they've been there a long time, but they're coming out for the first time. And so those communities, those carers, and those children are for the first time feeling like they're heard, by the collective, which I think is really key. And I'm really happy about it. And it's like you said, I've been moving towards this time my whole life, and the Gene Keys kind of created itself out of a deep mystical experience that I had in the mid 90s, and I've sort of been. It's quite amazing that we're here. Actually, we're sort of getting here. We've got here now, and it's now moving into the collective, and I think that's a part of it. That these biological shifts are taking place, and collectively we're all part of an integration program. We're trying to integrate these mutations in our different ways, and that's as much the carers as the children, as and you don't have to be autistic for it to happen either. It's like, but that seems to be a place where it's most intense.
Yeah.
The networked consciousness. So these, and but that's where we're heading as a species.
Yeah.
So it's just quite remarkable. And
And the parrot. So it isn't just the people, it's
the
the
parrot,
parrots. It's, you know, it's the whole, it's all sentient beings
Exactly.
are going to be connected in the way that perhaps they were about 12,000 years ago, or perhaps even further back. So, and what's so interesting, Richard, is these are emerging just as Pluto moved fully into Aquarius last November
Yeah.
2024, for the next 19 years. And it has a 248 cycle, 48-year cycle, so it hasn't been there since 1798. And this is very much about a transformation in the mind, but the Neptune part absolutely links into the heart. And Aquarian energy is about people who don't fit. They're sort of pushed to the periphery of society. They're oddballs. They're mavericks, as I've often felt as an astrologer, but even more so if if you're autistic. They are often young people, but it's also connected to this network of information, this kind of mycelium, mushrooms connecting or tree roots connecting, this network of information which they have telepathically. And I think this is also suggesting, because they're largely non-verbal, they're severely autistic and largely non-verbal, that we are shifting from language into the heart, which is going to be feeling. We're going to be communicating with each other much
Mm.
more through telepathy and the heart and feeling, a sort of wisdom heart, if you like,
Mm.
rather than TikTok and Twitter and short attention span, all being to do with the mind. And so I think these amazing autistic people, rather than being less than, are really going to be recognized, as the telepathy tape suggested, as our teachers and our
Yeah.
leaders and our savants. And we're going to study and follow their example in how they're actually doing this. I think it's really absolutely beautiful. But for sure, genetic mutations are taking place, because this has never happened before, or happened with our understanding.
Exactly. Exactly. And yeah, it's incredibly inspiring, and it was like a beautiful synchronicity that I got introduced to Susie Miller early, and I've been doing some talks with her soon, because she was in the telepathy tape. So I'm going to follow that strand that's opened up for me over the coming months, and I'll see where it leads. And I hope it'll lead me to actually meet some of these children, because I'd love to do that. It would be a real honor. But one of the things that they're saying is that, because people are asking, well, if you can hear everyone's thoughts and feel everyone's feelings, surely you're just wide open. That's incredibly vulnerable. And does that mean that they can all get in and kind of interfere with you? And obviously that's not the case. So what they're saying, and it kind of makes perfect sense for many of us, is that it's a heart field, right? So unless you're operating at that frequency of the heart, you can't arrive there.
Yeah.
You don't get there.
Yeah.
And so you have to do your trauma work. You have to do your shadow work to heal that part of you, so that you can arrive back at that innocence, and then you can access those higher, that what you call the wisdom mind, I guess. And that's something I see in Neptune as well, because in Gene Keys language, Neptune is moving through these keys, a sequence of keys, 36.
Yeah, that was on February the 10th.
That's right, 36 to 25 on February the 10th. And Neptune, as you know, does these long transits. So and then Neptune will be in that key 25 until Gene Key 25 until 2027, which is this kind of magical date in the Gene Keys and world, as I mentioned earlier. And so it's a real imprinting of love, of that love. And we were saying earlier that, you can read it with the Gene Keys, you can read these things at different levels. So at the shadow level, there's a word for the shadow of that key 25, which is constriction. And then there's a gift word, which is the sort of mid-plane word, which is acceptance. And then the highest frequency word is universal love. And that's how the Gene Keys work on these three planes. It's one energy, but the shadow of constriction is what we're probably going to see a lot of in the world over the next 3 years. So we're going to see more and more constriction. We're going to see more and more people bolting up their doors and going, this is my nation, this is my place, we're going to do what we want for us, I'm going to do what I need for me, it's too scary out there. There's going to be a lot of that kind of constriction going on at different levels. but then there's this deep opening that's possible as well. That's where the acceptance comes in, for us to really embrace our humanity. And then the highest level is that universal love, cosmic love, or divine love, which is what the imprinting is at its highest level. So it's a time of incredible expansion for anyone involved in consciousness studies, or this work that we're talking about, because the field itself, especially through Neptune and the beauty that Neptune brings, can really deliver us like high frequency experiences of love. Yeah. So I would expect more and more people to be experiencing those heightened frequencies over the next few years, and more people to be experiencing the constriction over the next few years. And that's the dichotomy of like the forking of the paths, like one group are going one way and the other group are going the other way. And yeah, that's just how it is.
Yes, it's so interesting because the astrology of it is that Neptune is hovering around the last couple of degrees of Pisces. And remember, it has a 165-year orbit. But we also are going into very soon what I call the Pisces pileup, where sort of late February through March through early April, we have an incredible number of planets. I think if you look at a date like March 28th, from memory, we have the Moon, Venus, Saturn, Neptune, North Node. We have a whole conglomeration, which is extremely, extremely rare. Now, at the lower level, all of that Neptune Pisces energy is around overwhelm, confusion, flooding, everything too much. At the higher level, it's about compassion. It is about unconditional love. It's about connection to source. It's about healing. It's exquisite. It's very yin, feminine energy that we were talking about earlier, Richard. So, and the fact that it is shifting into 0 degrees of Aries, the very first degree of the zodiac, the creator degree, for the first time in 165 years, but it is doing it hand in hand with Saturn. And they're exact to the degree at 0 of Aries in July, but then exact to the minute, 20th of February 2026. And you have to go back more than 12,000 years to find when that reliable 36-year conjunction has happened at 0 degrees of Aries. So I'm still digging into that research. And if anyone knows any better than that, please shout out. But with my research so far, it is certainly more than 10,000 years, and I believe more than 12,000. So that is one of the many unique bits of extremely rare pieces of astrology that for me is talking about a whole new launch for humanity, a whole new episode for humanity into the spiritual self.
Totally.
You become your own spiritual hero, Aries.
Yeah.
And it's something completely different from what we've had before.
Yeah, and then that Neptune energy will then in Gene Keys, it will transit in 2027, and I think it was March, into Gene Key 17. So the heart space will have been prepared. And if you're involved in that work, you will be like creating that field. And what that field will do, the more we live in it, is it will then open up the set Gene Key 17, and that's the third eye. That's the city of omniscience that sees everything. I mean, literally everything. And I had that experience back in 1996. So I remember that experience of seeing both forwards and backwards in time simultaneously, seeing the fractal nature of the universe, its perfection, seeing down the algorithms of existence, and not just seeing, but through the hearts, feeling and seeing simultaneously. And being able to read each other through the field. And that's where this networked intelligence comes from. The third eye, actually, my understanding of it is it opens through the heart. So the heart opens up, and then the higher centers open up as a result of that heart work. And so, in a way, the best inner work we can be doing over the next few years is building intimacy all around us, really working on our intimacy, building it, cultivating it, going into our vulnerability and healing our heart and healing our traumas and our difficulties, and then opening it, so that we can be ready for that future human, kind of, to be the vehicle of that higher consciousness. So that's what I'm seeing in the next few years anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also see the shift of Neptune from Pisces into zero of Aries as moving from victimhood to
Right.
sovereignty and heart sovereignty, in fact, and heart coherence, because the more we can be in heart coherence as part of that tuning into the heart radio station, let's call it, that particular field of heart energy will infect others that we come into contact with that level of heart coherence. So we can act as jump leads for other people if we ourselves are able to reach that state of heart coherence and an unconditional love.
I love that, jump leads.
Because I think that's what we're doing, because we know that when we're in heart coherence, the toroidal field of the heart gets much larger. It becomes more almost symmetrical. There's a kind of physiological harmony that comes into play. So not only is every cell in your body healthier, but you are infecting other people with that potential as well. So that's where this, again, this community network of very much Aquarian energy becomes part of it too. So it's so interesting. I mean, we talked a lot about this last time, Richard. These 3 years of 25, 26, 27 are absolutely transformational. And the astrology is so specific across these next 3 years. It's quite mind blowing for me, because normally as an astrologer, I'm talking about this last happened, 200 years ago or 30 years ago or 40 years ago. And now I'm saying this has never, ever happened before. And just to kind of clarify this a little, and I'll probably do a whole separate video on this anyway, it's interesting, and you and I briefly touched on it before we turned the record button on, that on the day when Uranus was discovered, which was the 13th of March, 1781, Uranus was in Gemini. That is the sign it is going to re-enter in July of this year, and then fully in April 2026 for the next 7 to 8 years. On the day that Uranus was discovered, Pluto was also in Aquarius then, 6 of Aquarius, in a tight trine to Neptune, which was at 4 degrees of Libra. And what we have right now is Pluto not 120 degrees to Neptune, but another very positive aspect, 60 degrees to Neptune and 120 degrees to Uranus. Now, just taking that kind of mini triangle, we haven't had that for over 500 years. You add in Saturn, who is holding hands with Neptune, and to quote Ray Merriman, another wonderful astrologer, he has not been able to find that before in history. And you and I know are going to come on to talk about Sedna. If you add in Sedna into the picture, Sedna is in aspect to Neptune, to Uranus, to Pluto, and also to a dwarf planet called Haumea, which is part of that wonky triangle that we talked about last time. So Sedna, as a pure principle of metamorphosis, profound metamorphosis, is in aspect to every single one of those dwarf planets, plus Haumea, the dwarf planet, which again has never happened before, because Sedna has an 11,400-year cycle. So you've got this kind of mind-blowing rarity or uniqueness even of astrological convergence, let alone the fact the Earth is going through the galactic current sheet only happens every 12,000 years. Despite all the other stuff we've talked about and the Yuga cycles, it is, you can't get away from the series of convergences, endings, beginnings, and also I think some game changers. Like I think the galactic connections will become much stronger again, which is wonderful. They are game changers. They're quantum jumps in our understanding, in our intelligence, in what they can guide us into. As a future human, both in beneficial technologies, but also in our own inner spiritual technology that they're going to help us with. So, it's a whole new ball game, I think.
Yeah. They're like sort of, they're like new acupuncture pinpoints in the galaxy for us, aren't they? And they're just wormholes, and there's so many of them. you can choose your wormhole and just spend an entire life just in that wormhole exploring it. Never mind the thousands of others
Yeah.
and those mythologies. And also it's beautiful that they're bringing, many of them are bringing back the indigenous mythologies and wisdom, through their symbolism. So we are going to learn more about those mythologies and wisdom, because they're a part of our ancestry. And so it feels like really relevant to integrate the wisdom of those ancient stories that we were talking about earlier. But I just want to before going to that, I wanted to say that what you said about when Uranus was kind of discovered by Herschel in 1780, well, 1781.
1781, yeah.
Yeah. Ra Uru Hu, the founder of human design, said some very deep things about that, and he based some of his prophecies on that time, and where Pluto was in Gene Key 41, where if you're a Gene Keys or a human design geek in the fifth line, and we'll be back there in 2027. So this cycle is a kind of imprinting cycle, and Ra called it like we're transitioning from the 7-centered being to the 9-centered being. That's how he looked at it. And so we're becoming a new consciousness, with a different kind of dynamic, sort of energetic housing structure, and so it's not just biological, it's also energetic. It's at different layers and dimensions of our energy body, of our light body. So we're becoming more complex at one level, but also simpler at another level. Simpler in what we see, because when you start to see through the heart and the wisdom mind, everything becomes clear and lucid, and you don't get bogged down in all the complexities and the data. Because there's just this lucid eye that is understanding and seeing everything in its perfection, which is very different from, our kind of mind that goes into overwhelm so easily with the amount of data.
Absolutely, and that's so interesting, Richard, because Gemini really is about the mind, but it's about neural networks, and Uranus is going to really electrify. It's the planet connected to electricity. It's really going to electrify those neural networks in a different way, possibly through galactic input. We'll have to wait and see. But Uranus is also very connected to light. And in one of its previous transits in Gemini, back in the late 1600s, there was a Dutch scientist called Huygens, Huygens, and he actually developed a whole new theory of light, around that it was, it was a wave and a particle, etc. So I think we are going to discover a huge amount about light, because light, as we know, carries information. Veda Austin's beautiful work about water is condensed light and water is consciousness. There's something around that whole area and us shifting into the light body that is part of this picture too. But absolutely, I love this remembrance of the indigenous wisdom, because, they are those wonderful people who, again, have been shoved to the periphery of society, have so much wisdom about the earth that we have just kind of trashed in our modern so-called civilized society. So there's going to be a remembrance of that. And as you say, that brings simplicity. And if we look outside of us, as I've often said, there are 10,000 problems to solve in a 3D linear way, which we're never going to do. If you look inwards to the heart and connect to the earth, it becomes really one-pointed. It becomes incredibly simple. And the more we can do that, the more we can just rest into peace and love and bliss, as opposed to being buffeted and dazzled by the thousands of problems out there. So, switch off the news, just tune out of all of that stimuli, because it's going to get crazy. We're just at the start of the crazies.
I agree.
This is just the beginning of the crazies.
Yeah. It's a fun thing to do, and I might do it for this year. I haven't done it for years, and you can use the gene keys and the human design stuff, and you can look on January, when the sun moves into 41, which is the beginning in 22nd, you can see, well, where are all the other planets? And it kind of gives you that imprint for the year. And so Uranus will be in gene key 23, right, in the 6th line. And gene key, and for me, I think Uranus also is about curveballs and the unexpected. And so you can see, well, what's going to be unexpected this year? What is going to be non-linear? Where's that going to occur? Because there's always something. And GQ23 is what you said. It's about breakthrough. Actually, it might well be technological breakthrough, but it's also it's complexity and simplicity. So complexity is the shadow where we get buried in it, but then there's the simplicity that is on the other side of the breakthrough.
Yeah.
So I would expect, like you said, this year breakthroughs in simplicity, and so for us, I think there might be a movement, more and more that begins leaning towards simplicity.
Beautiful.
As you said, switching off stuff, going back into nature, going back into the simplicity of our being, our breathing, our a higher mind, being able to kind of really foster this universal love field, that because once we start to tune into that, things do become simple again.
And it's a breakthrough in consciousness.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting that both Pluto and Uranus, far out planets, are both in air signs. Aquarius and Gemini are air signs. So on the one hand, we're going to see an awful lot more of the out there in the air. And, clearly we've seen that already with the, UAPs and UFOs and drones and blah, blah, blah. We're going to see an awful lot more of that and innovations in aviation. But it's also to do with the breath. Gemini is linked to the lungs. And so that simple breath work practice of, dropping into the heart with your breath, dropping into the yogic belly breath, which I've talked about, that is so stabilizing. And again, it's so simple. And if we could go back to that, these things will serve us well. Feet on the earth, doing breath work practice, hugging a tree. That's where the breakthroughs in consciousness are going to come from, I think, in remarkable ways. And it's going to be a helter-skelter year of excitement with consciousness as well. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely beautiful. So, and just to really emphasize the rarity of the things that I'm looking at, this Saturn-Neptune conjunction is making real the dream for humanity. It's becoming your own spiritual hero. And it's exact by degree, July, same time that Uranus moves into Gemini for the first time in 84 years, but it's exact to the minute next February. But across these 3 years is remarkable astrologically, because by early summer, Northern Hemisphere next year, all of the planets, the outer planets, will have changed signs. So they're settling into their new mode of expression, if you like, and will be fully settled in 2027. So it's, it is just super, super exciting. The last time we had a trine between Pluto and Uranus, also just taking that aspect, was 300 years ago. And that was the beginning of the Italian and European Renaissance of huge creativity and art and poetry and music. This time, I think it will be more technological innovation. It's going to be, creative with art and music as well. But we're going to see an awful lot of technological innovation. And it is very exciting, because if we also look at the seed point for Uranus and Pluto, they were conjunct in the late 60s. Now, I don't know if you were around then, Richard, but this was
popping in
time of the hippies, peace and love and living in community, living from the heart. That was the seed point. And now they're already in trine, which is the blossoming of whatever that seed point was in the late 60s. That was the promise. Now it's becoming the manifestation. And so if you can just tune in, even just to that aspect of what Richard and I are talking about, that alone is so optimistic. And we would both, I think, really encourage you to focus on the love, focus on the joy, focus on the gratitude, focus on the compassion, because you become the timeline that you are locking onto. You become the timeline that you are focused on. That's what you're feeding with your energy, just like food. And you start to manifest in your own reality that which you are focused upon. And that's your superpower.
Yeah. And a lot of that work or that play is going to be done in our relationships. It's inevitable, right? So I think that's where, a really great place to be focusing, and just in all our relationships, our friendships, giving a special time to friendships, because the distractions of all the technology can really, our friendships can pay a price from that. And so it's about kind of changing that momentum so that you actually are consciously spending more time with people you love.
Yeah.
And people you love spending time with, so like you saying you're going away on holiday with your friends, and so that's the kind of thing where you're in the love field together, because the more time we spend in those energies, the more we're preparing for this next phase, and I think the more resilient we're going to be, when the unexpected curveballs keep coming in, which they will.
Which they will, guaranteed. But it's
Yes.
finding, as you said, that inner resilience, that we have a core, we have a center, that's our default point, that we're not scattered, because the potential for scattering is very high this year. So this is really training us into our mastery. I think this year, trains into our mastery of focus, attention, and particularly living through the heart. It's going to be an accelerated training, there is no doubt, because our ascension is so accelerated right now. But this is really the beginning of learning our mastery.
Yeah.
And as Richard said, this genetic mutation may take many, many, many years to unfold to its fullness, but we are already in the mush of the caterpillar's chrysalis. There is no going back. We are in the mush. This is a one-way process. This is a one-way street. So let's embrace it, because this is what we volunteered for, and it's a very unique opportunity for humanity.
Absolutely.
I'd like to shift gears now, Richard, and start to talk about a new program that you're bringing in, which is absolutely fascinating for me.
Sure. Or do you want to talk about Sedna first, or should
Yeah,
we?
let's talk about Sedna. Yeah.
Because that's like a nice piece, isn't it? That will lead into
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been thinking about Sedna recently, and because Sedna has this incredibly long trajectory you can tell us about in a minute, but it's around 12,000 years, so it's around this half cycle of the Yugas, and the Yugas are traditionally a 24,000 approximately cycle, and then that got us talking about the Yugas and me thinking about the Yugas, and I sent you some emails and things, and everyone has different ideas about the Yugas, and the what I was really coming to, in fact, lots of different insights that I've been holding in different parts of my brain or being kind of suddenly coalesced. Do you know what I mean when that
Yes.
happened? Like
Yes.
suddenly, like it was like there was that coherence. I was like, ding, 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 ding. I'm like, oh my goodness, that all of that suddenly fits. And I started to think about Sedna, because her myth is this, it's this deep mythology of the kind of falling, of her going down under the sea, and then her fingers being chopped off by the father, and then those fingers becoming the magical mammals under, the whales and the dolphins and the seals and stuff, but what I realize is, because the Yuga cycle that I resonate most with, the knowledge, is from Sri Yukteswar, who was Yogananda's master, and he was an incredible man. Wrote this only one single book he wrote, small little book, The Holy Science, and it's an incredible diamond of a book, and it blow you away if you've not read it. It's just like, it's only sort of 60, 70, 80 pages or something, but it's just distilled wisdom at its greatest. And in the beginning, he opens up by saying, because he's a Jnana yogi, so he was a sage, a savant, a deeply enlightened man, and so he applied his wisdom mind to this problem of the Yugas. And what he came up with is that there'd been a miscalculation that had crept into the ancient records during the Kali Yuga. So when the Kali Yuga was at its thickest, miscalculations came in, and they carried on through the Kali Yuga, and they would then led to more miscalculations and more misunderstandings. And there was this notion that the Kali Yuga lasts forever and ever and ever, which is how it feels when you're in the Kali Yuga.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And so we've inherited these kind of crazy calculations of, like, we're in it for another 400 plus thousand years, right? And which is like a real victim place, right? Well, we're stuck then. We're stuck here for 400,000 years. I'm a victim of it. And that's like, so what he did is he threw that out and he said, here's the correct calculations. And he ran it on this 12,000 year cycle. And he showed in that little book that we were actually now, and what he beautifully showed is that there's a rising cycle and a descending cycle. So we start at the Satya Yuga, which is perfection, and then it starts to descend, and that what they call the Dharma descends, and the Dharma starts to become less clear as it moves through the other cycles. And so things start to be forgotten. And here's an interesting thing I didn't mention, Pam, is that as more and more people forget the sacred knowledge, but certain ones hang on to it, what you had was a society where the majority of people had forgotten the divine wisdom, but a few of them still had it and were holding on to it. And so they were revered and even worshipped, right? And then over time, even they forgot it, but the structure itself remained. So you suddenly had like these lineages, which became our royal lines with this kind of so-called expert, and they became our religions as well, with these people that know, or these royal kind of special people. And then these hierarchies developed, and they developed out of that forgetting process, until you get to the bottom of the Kali Yuga, where the forgetting is almost complete, and then it starts to rise again. So, and that's the next Yuga is called Dwapara Yuga, which is the rising Yuga. And so as I was thinking about Sedna, I was thinking that is a descending cycle myth, because it's about the feminine that goes deep down into the underworld and then gives birth to these beautiful magical mammals, which is the future us, I believe, encoded. And we can talk about that in a moment. But what I started to think about was this man I interviewed some time ago called Angunkak, who is an Inuit elder. And he's affectionately known as Uncle. He's a wonderful, wonderful man. And I did it as part of this program I developed called the Dream Arc, which was about interpreting the dream language of different indigenous cultures. And I did it with this friend of mine, Rosie Aronson. And for years, we created this incredible program. And we interviewed lots of different wisdom keepers. And if you're interested, we'll put the link and you can go and have a look at it. But I'll definitely put the link to the interview with him, because he was born in northern Greenland as a boy, and he, as a boy, he learned to be a shaman. He was inducted as a shaman, and he tells these incredible stories. In the interview, I didn't even have to say anything; I just let him run, and he told these amazing stories. But in his village, he could trace through the ancestral stories, the oral tradition, he could trace the people who had been living in his village for over 6,000 years. And that number caught my mind. And I thought, well, that's probably when the earliest myths started to develop from Satya Yuga. Satya Yuga is the forgetting, is the remembering. And then the next one down is Treta Yuga, where you start to forget. And then suffering starts to creep in. And when suffering creeps in, stories begin. Right? Myths begin, because myths always, evolve around suffering. Before suffering, there's no mythology, because you're just in it, right? So the myths start to begin around that time, 6,000 years into the cycle, and that's when those early traditions of his myth, so those Inuit myths, like Sedna, kind of stemmed from. And I thought that was, wow, that's so interesting, because also those Inuit peoples would be the people that mastered how to survive after the Ice Age, which, we're talking 12,000 or so years ago. So those Inuit peoples who know how to live in extreme cold temperatures are the story keepers, the indigenous story keepers of that very, very first kind of early mythologies of our planet, of the descending arc of these Yuga cycles. So all of this was like really amazing to me. And then I started to wonder, I wonder what the rising mythology will become, because it feels like we haven't discovered it yet. We're living in it. So we're living in that new Dwapara rising cycle. And then we're sort of writing the new myth, so which is kind of coming out of those sea creatures that she gave birth to through her fingers. And I also think like the fingers are really interesting, because we're now in the digital age, and we're kind of reconfiguring our myth through our digits, and there's magic also that's coming through the digital age as well. And I just was all of these things started to kind of coalesce inside me, and I do recommend this book, by the way, which was by two students of Yukteswar. I mean, not while he was alive, Joseph Selbie, and they took his teaching and applied it to human history, and they really did their research, and it's a rollicking read, and it projects far into the future as well. So it projects the Yuga cycle and describes it and explains it. It's a really good book. So anyone who wants to do your own research, and I know there are different views of the Yugas, and I think that's each of us has to do our own individual research, but that's a great book to start understanding it. But those are some of my thoughts about Sedna, and her long cycle, bringing back the memories of this ancient wisdom of the descending arc, and then us beginning now our ascension process, which is reconstitution, of literally, even the word remember, it's to bring like the members of our fingers, like we've got to remember ourselves and piece ourselves back to get those fingers and put them back on in a new way, so that and I think we'll move through the digital age at a certain point and no longer need that technology.
Correct.
Because that'll be like a stepping stone that we've needed, and then we leave it behind, or it no longer works, might also be the thing that happens. And we start finding that technology inside ourselves. So that's what I see as the coming now of the future human. And I see that as those magical sea creatures are. I'll let you talk about them, because I know that you love.
Yeah, but isn't it interesting that Sedna is currently in Gemini, and
Yeah,
Gemini rules the hands and the fingers
right.
as well
Perfect.
as the lungs. So and when Uranus was discovered, it was also in Gemini, and Uranus is going to come to conjunct Sedna, really from July onwards for the next 18 months after that, and that I see as a kind of ignition point for the metamorphosis, because that's only going to happen around Uranus has an 84-year cycle. It'll catch up with Sedna sort of every 85, 86 years or so. So that's the ignition point, given everything else in the bigger picture with astrology. That is the real kicker, I think, for our metamorphosis to accelerate. And Sedna turning into those beautiful sea creatures. I know, having listened to Joan Ocean's beautiful work. I don't know if you know Joan Ocean. She's now in her 80s, and she swam for many, many years with the whales and the dolphins, and they spoke to her. I mean, she just completely was telepathic with them, and she describes them as 15th dimensional creatures, and very much connected to Lemurian energy, ancient Lemurian energy too. And when I'm asked about, okay, so who is this future human? How do you paint the picture? The closest I can get to is drawing on what I know about ancient Lemuria, that they lived in the light body, they had a sense of connection to all living beings, they didn't kill to eat, they were telepathic, they had great healing ability, and they were very connected to the sea creatures, particularly the dolphins and the whales. So there's something about that cycle repeating now, which feels just incredibly exciting. And as I say, it's a one-way street. We're maybe hanging on to the wreckage of the boat, but we have to move forwards. There's no going
Oh
back.
yeah, and just to say that Angunquak, a lovely uncle, when he speaks about his culture as a very matriarchal culture, so it was so ancient. It's like it was a true matriarchy, and it worked very well. And so that really also fitted with what's happening, and with the sea creatures, and with Sedna, this goddess who descends down, but then has to reascend now. Yeah. So I just thought it was a beautiful piece, that about the matriarchy and the return of that energy.
Yes, and I think we're going to see that much more strongly because it's been so out of balance, hasn't it, with a kind of toxic masculine
Yeah.
as well. And one of the reasons I believe, Richard, for you that you really see us on that ascending phase is that vision you had of that blinding flash of light, which I know many other people have either experienced or are talking about as coming down the road for humanity. And that really was very prophetic for you, wasn't it? You talked about it at your London talk at St. James's
Yeah.
Church.
Yes, because it was this flash of just the quantum leap, a galactic quantum leap that seemed to take place throughout the whole of the universe simultaneously. So everything else was entangled with that quantum leap, and our solar not it, I couldn't say it began anywhere. It was omnipresent. It was like omnispontaneous in some way, and but we were part of it, and part of the chain of the bursting forth of that light, and it made me sort of realize that Yuga cycle was also had macrocosmic perspectives that even Yukteswar didn't see, and I don't know whether those have been measured, but they might have more in common with the original measuring, which is in hundreds of thousands of years, because I have this sense from that that flash of light, when it happens, and I can't say when it happens, but I could say it's close, is us moving into Treta Yuga, which is the Yuga of light, of vast light, from Dwapara to Treta. So in a grander cycle, because this is what I love about the Yugas, and again, what he showed, Yukteswar, is that time is fractal. So the Yuga cycle is not a linear, it's not for linear thinkers. And he said that's where the mistakes crept in, because it was linear people, linear minds trying to work out time frames. And he said it's fractal, they're nested within each other. There's a Yuga within a Yuga within a Yuga, and there's these four, and then there's sub-Yugas, and you can go down to like Mike, and there's a Vedic scholar online who's done it. We can put their link in as well, because he's gone down into more microcosmic epochs and phases. But you can go out wider and see these vast spans of time that maybe connect more into those epochs like Lemuria, which may be timescales that are much larger than we realize, because it is said anyway. I love when people say that. It is said that in between epochs there is often a pause, like a kind of a dynamic pause of some form that could be hundreds or tens of thousands of years, because there's often a cataclysm that separates two epochs of some form. So there's this pause in the middle that could mean that they're much further apart than we realize. So Lemuria, we don't, it may be a long, long, long time ago. I mean, to the being out of form, there is no time. So it's instant. It's all now. But to us in form, 100,000 years seems like a very long time. But yeah, so I had that feeling that we're moving into a vast new kind of macrocosmic phase of cycle where there's an ascension underway, or that's going to come very fast and very suddenly. And I'm not saying it's going to come even in my lifetime. I don't necessarily expect that, but I can sense through that vision that it's on the horizon now. And maybe everything that we're talking about and these sort of smaller cycles are beginning to kind of form like the process that's moving towards it. So I don't know when it is, but I know it's coming.
Yeah, and if I had to guess, maybe this is a rash thing to say, but when you're talking about the cycle of light, I'm very much thinking this is something to do with the sun. We're at the peak of solar cycle 25 at the moment. It's just hurling out M-class flares close to X-class. And also when it starts to throw out coronal mass ejections. I mean, one of the biggies was in September 1859 when we had the Carrington event, which fried the first internet, the Victorian telegram system. So because of the convergence of the astrology as well as the cosmology, I personally expect this to be within the next couple of years. If I was a betting woman, which I'm not, I would bet the next, and it will be a Uranian event. It will be when Uranus is very, very strong in the astrology. It'll be a sudden, unexpected bolt of light that is transformational. And so that's why I think these next 3 years are so absolutely extraordinary. But I'd love to move on now, Richard, to talking about the star pearl, because time is
Yeah.
quickly on. I'd love to talk because, I listened to a recent interview of yours about this because I know it's just launching roundabout now. And it fascinated me because it's so linked to the Aquarian energy. And yeah, anyway, so tell me about the birthing of this and what it is, because you're talking about it as really offering us the frequencies for the new human, the collective harmonies for the new human.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, Gene Keys is like a mystery school, as you said at the beginning, and so it has layers, and it's opening and expanding in layers. And I sometimes talk about it is as built with my team anyway. I talk about it's like, look, we're building a cathedral. It's a bit like building a cathedral, and it just it takes a long time. You've got to put these big pieces together, and anyway, it felt like that this piece, because it's taken us 5 years, was putting the roof on, and it was a little bit hairy, and so it was like a really momentous kind of moment for any of us connected into the Gene Keys, and it's in a way the jewel of the crown and the teachings, and the technology is obviously much more advanced now in it. So we've created a really amazing program. And as you say, it's about embodying the harmonics of the future human. So it's about preparing for what's coming in a practical way. And so the way it works is it looks at your life. It starts with a self-assessment, actually, which you do, and it asks you lots of questions, and it gives you harmonics of sentences. So like it gives you different sentences, like a low harmonic sentence, which might be a victim thing, and it gives you a mid harmonic, I'm doing okay with this. The low one might be, I'm not doing okay with this. The middle one will be like, I'm learning, I'm getting better, and then the top one is I'm humming, I'm fine in that area of my life. And you get asked all these questions, and it's just subjective. You fill it out yourself, and it's just this little slider, and then you end up with different colors, and then it kind of takes all that information about your life that's half right brain, half left brain, and then it compiles it and gives you a series of scores or frequencies that form a kind of a sort of vision or of a matrix or a Merkaba that represents your whole life, right? Practically speaking. So it includes like things like your finances, and it includes your relationships, and it includes, your spiritual alignment to your inner purpose, and it includes everything basically. And so, but it shows us, it's like looking at a mechanic looking at an engine, perhaps, and then just tuning it and going, well, this bit's a bit out. So you don't have to rebuild the whole engine. You just have to find the bits that are not quite singing and then work on them. And that's what it does. It then takes you into this, based on your assessment, it gives you some spheres that for you to work on in your life. And then it's a program, right? And so it then opens up, and I recommend that you take 9 months with it, because to change your life really takes, it's like a gestation period, 9 months. You want to birth a new you, that's how long it's actually going to take. So it's amazing that it's launched this year in 20. I didn't plan that. That's when it all came together. 5 years in the making. And it's launched, and we're going to take, several thousand people on this journey over 2025, over these 9 months. It kicks off in February, but you can join whenever you want. It's like it adjusts itself. The program adjusts itself to whenever you begin it. So it sets your trajectory, and then it will kind of give you reminders every, and every sort of month or whatever. But you're doing inner work and you're doing outer work. So you're asked to come up with your own little actions that will change the places in your life where there's disharmony. And you don't have to rush into anything. You should do it gently and quietly, and taking care of yourself and taking care of different areas. And the tech is really cool because it tracks your progress. So you'll then be asked to do the self-assessment again after 3 months and see what's changed. And you're given what's called an action triangle, and they all have different names. They've got lovely names like empathic mission, or what was the one, leading the charge. That was one my sister got recently. And mine's called Fortune of Our Fathers, and so, which is about the patriarchy and what to leave behind and what to take with you. And it's very magical in that way, because you're working with archetypes in your life, but you're also working with practical things in your life. So if you haven't got enough money, to kind of, so that you can fully relax, it asks you about that, and it kind of challenges you to adjust that in your life, and you then go on this journey, and so that's it. But the beauty of it is, in a way, it's also a collective thing. It's a network thing. So all the program itself will also track the entire community, not through, it's anonymous. So, but what it'll do is it'll show a whole community of thousands of people adjusting their lives in lots of different unique harmonic ways. It's using the gene keys teachings, but so it's giving you very specific patterns and codings of gene keys for you to work with. And those gene keys kind of invite you to look at certain shadow patterns or trauma things, and then adjust them, and then find the gifts inside them. And you've got to do that in your life. It's something you've got to do. It's not just like reading, so it's a transformational journey. And then over time, what you're doing is you're tuning the harmonics of your life. And the idea behind it, because it's this Merkaba, is that the field in the middle, because there's a single sphere in the middle, it's surrounded by 6 spheres, is that central sphere is where the miracles happen. So if you tune all the outer rims, and it's crisscrossed by pathways, and they all have names as well, so that's part of the journey. But if you tune all the outer rims and you get them in harmony, then the middle one starts to really shine, and that's where miracles happen. They call it the miracle field, and it's in the core of our being, right? So this is a representation of a human life, but it's also a representation of the whole of humanity.
Yeah.
So the more of us tune our individual lives to these higher harmonics, the more the whole of humanity gets tuned to these higher harmonics. So it's bold in that way, in that I've got some amazing technical whizzes who've put this together. So it's really cool in how it operates on your phone, and you can kind of, and it reminds you, and it gives you a journey, and it kind of takes you on that journey, and you're part of something as well. So the idea is that it will kind of live on for many years, and anyone can come and do it, and they can stay in it as long as you want. And as I said, you can do as many self-assessments, and each time you do it, that your scores will probably start going up, and then eventually you'll get up. I mean, the bands have names, so like if you get to the band that's above 80%, you've really kind of got home. At that point, your life is so humming that you don't really need any tools anymore, because it then sort of just the harmony starts to run itself. So your life starts to you're there. So it's very helpful, I think, for those of us, just for tuning our lives, so that kind of deep soul essence that's the core of our being can step fully into that center, and generate the miracles and the synchronicities that kind of allow us to fulfill our highest destiny, our highest purpose. And that's really all it's about.
It's so beautiful, Richard, the way you describe it, because it has echoes for me for the North Node, which is the kind of leader of the cavalry of your birth chart, actually. I was writing my book about the nodes. I mean, I very much saw it as the leader of the cavalry in order for you to get your soul's growth and satisfaction in this lifetime. But I love the way you're describing it, because it's so Aquarian, because there's a paradox with the Aquarian energy, because part of it is expressing the completely unique your unique essence, in a way more fully than you've ever done before. But also, how is that feeding your gifts into the whole network, into the whole of humanity? So it appears to be paradoxical, because it's about you, but then it's feeding that particular unique puzzle piece into the
Mm.
whole for humanity. So it's perfect for the time. The Star Pearl program is perfect for the time. It really is, whether you fully realized it astrologically or not.
No idea.
You
I
know,
had no idea, and I certainly didn't. Everyone was just going like, "When are you going to bring it out? When are you going to bring it out?" It's been years,
divine timing, Richard. Divine timing. Fabulous. Well, gosh, it's been a wonderful discussion. Anything, and we'll put the blurb for all the connections for
Yeah.
Richard's website, and there's probably a separate link, is there, for the Star Pearl program as well, Richard?
Yeah, I'll give you like several links, and also the links to the Yuga stuff, and to I really hope people will watch Angunkak, the uncle. He's such a beautiful man, and listen to his heart as he speaks, and go and visit his website and stuff. He's it's called Ice Wisdom, and he's such a beautiful man, and he's one of the last Inuit elders that's left. Actually, some of his friends died not long ago, and so he's really holding you
Yeah, yeah.
know that teaching.
Yeah, yeah. If you can send me all those links, and I'll
I
put them
will.
beneath the video. And anything else you'd like to share, Richard, before we close?
I think we've covered a lot, actually. I don't. I think we should leave it there.
Okay. Yeah.
Other than just thank you, Pam. It's such a joy learning from you and sort of having our minds meld together in these magical ways.
It really is, because the whole becomes greater than the sum of the parts. I think we
Yeah,
can we can cross pollinate, and it's just very enriching. So
yeah.
thank you so much for your time, Richard. Thank you
Thank
so much
you.
for all your wisdom and being here, and hope
Oh,
everyone's benefited from this and enjoy it, and just sending loads of love to all of you out there. God bless you all.